He stood on the gallows in Kraków, and the last thing he saw was a crowd that hated him more than any man alive. His name was Josef Bühler, and in less than 60 seconds, you'll understand why the rope that killed him was almost too merciful an ending. Because what this man did, sitting quietly in a villa by a lake, sipping cognac, while planning the murder of millions, is one of the coldest true stories in human history. If you're new here, welcome to Nazi Dark History, where we don't sanitize the past, we expose it. Hit subscribe now, because what you're about to learn changes how you see one of the most infamous meetings ever held. Let's go back. Berlin, January 20th, 1942, a lakeside mansion at Wannsee. 15 men, coffee cups, neat stacks of paper, no screaming, no blood, just calm, bureaucratic murder being drafted like a business plan. And in that room sat a man most people have never heard of, Josef Bühler. He wasn't the most famous face in Nazi Germany. He wasn't Himmler. He wasn't Heydrich. But what he said in that meeting would accelerate the death of millions faster than almost anyone else in the room. Because Bühler wasn't just attending, he was pushing. He stood up, yes, stood up, and requested that the final solution begin in his territory first. Why would a man volunteer his own region to be ground zero for genocide? The answer is disturbing, and it says everything about who Josef Bühler really was. Bühler was the state secretary of the general government, the Nazi-occupied heart of Poland. That territory held one of the largest Jewish populations in all of German-controlled Europe. And Bühler didn't see people. He saw a logistics problem, overcrowding, disease, inconvenience. So he made a request that still chills historians today. Start here. Start with us. We have the infrastructure already in place. Take a second and sit with that. A man asked for his own region to become the launching point of mass extermination because it was administratively efficient. That single moment at Wannsee is one of the most terrifying examples in history of evil wearing a suit and speaking in polite meeting room language. But here's what almost nobody talks about. Bühler wasn't some isolated monster who appeared out of nowhere. He climbed, he networked, he impressed the right people. Behind the sterile paperwork was a man who was, in some strange, twisted way, good at being liked. Colleagues described him as sharp, controlled, disciplined, the guy who always had the numbers ready, who never lost his composure. Even his personal life had moments that felt almost ordinary. Dinners with his wife, quiet nights. A man who could laugh at a joke one evening and sign off on death camp logistics the next morning. That contrast, the ordinary human beside the architect of horror, is exactly what makes this story so unsettling. Because it proves something history keeps warning us about. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the calm man in the room who says, "I have a suggestion." And Bühler's suggestion helped speed up one of the darkest chapters in human history. But here's the twist most people don't expect: the same efficiency, the same confidence, the same calm control that made Bühler dangerous would one day be the very thing that helped seal his fate in a courtroom he never saw coming. Because the war was going to end, and when it did, the world was going to come looking for the men who sat quietly at that lake house. And Josef Bühler was about to learn that paperwork leaves a trail. Germany collapsed in the spring of 1945. Berlin fell. The men who once sat comfortably around conference tables suddenly had nowhere left to hide. And Josef Bühler, he ran. The calm bureaucrat who once calculated death schedules was now just another fugitive, trying to disappear into the chaos of a broken country. But here's the thing about men like Bühler: they're used to control. They're used to plans working. And when the world flips upside down, that kind of man doesn't know how to simply vanish. He was captured by American forces. And for a moment, it looked like he might slip through the cracks of history the way so many others did. But there was a problem for Bühler, a big one. The country that suffered the most under his signature wasn't going to let him go quietly. Poland wanted him, because while Nuremberg was busy putting the biggest names in the Nazi hierarchy on trial, There were thousands of other men like Bühler, whose crimes were carried out not in Berlin, but on Polish soil, against Polish people, in the very territory he governed. So in 1946, he was extradited, handed over, sent straight into the hands of the nation that knew exactly what he'd done to them. Picture that moment. The man who once requested that mass extermination begin in his territory was now standing on that same territory, waiting to be judged by the people who survived it. There's a kind of historical justice, in that so precise it almost feels scripted. His trial began in Krakow in 1948, in front of the Supreme National Tribunal, a court built specifically to judge the worst of the worst, the men responsible for turning Poland into a graveyard. And during that trial, something happened that shocked even seasoned observers. Bühler didn't rage, he didn't panic, he didn't beg. He did what he'd always done. He stayed composed, controlled, precise. The same calm demeanor that once made him effective in Nazi meetings now made him look eerily detached in a courtroom filled with survivors and grieving families. Witnesses spoke of the ghettos, the starvation, the trains, the silence that followed when entire communities simply ceased to exist. And through it all, prosecutors laid out something undeniable. This wasn't a man who was just following orders. This was a man who had requested to be first in line. The court didn't need to search for ambiguity. His own words at Wannsee had already convicted him before the trial even started. The verdict came fast, and it came with weight. Guilty of crimes against humanity, guilty of contributing directly to the extermination of the Jewish population under his authority. The sentence, death. But this is where the story takes a turn almost nobody expects. Because the way Josef Bühler was executed wasn't just an ending, it was a message. Poland didn't want a quiet, hidden death behind prison walls. They wanted the world to see what happens to men who treat genocide like paperwork. And the method chosen for his execution would become one of the most talked about details in his entire case. A detail so specific, so symbolic, that historians still reference it today when discussing how post-war Poland delivered justice to Nazi officials. Because unlike some executions carried out in secrecy, what happened to Bühler was deliberate, public in record, and tied directly to the crimes he committed. And once you understand how he was executed, and why that method was chosen, the full weight of this story finally lands. That's coming next, and trust me, it's the part of this story people search for the most. August 22nd, 1948, Kraków, Poland, a city that had lived under Bühler's authority, a city that had buried its own because of decisions made in rooms he sat in, was about to witness his final moment. The method chosen was hanging, but this wasn't just an execution, it was a statement. Public trials in post-war Poland weren't only about punishment, they were about proof. Proof that the architects of the Holocaust, even the quiet ones, the ones who never fired a weapon or built a camp with their own hands, would still answer for what they authorized. Bühler was led to the gallows inside Montelupic prison, a place already soaked in wartime history, ironically once used by the Gestapo itself to detain and torture Polish prisoners. Think about that for a second. The man who helped design a system of terror was executed inside a building that had once been a symbol of that very terror. History has a way of closing loops like that. Witnesses described him as composed, almost eerily calm, right up until the end, that same unsettling discipline that defined his entire career. No breakdown, no confession soaked in emotion, just silence and then the drop. It was fast, efficient, almost clinical, which, in a strange and haunting way, mirrored exactly how he had approached the deaths of others. There was no elaborate suffering, no drawn-out spectacle, but the symbolism was enormous. A man whose signature helped set genocide into motion was now facing the full, final weight of the law on the very soil where his crimes had unfolded. And that's really the core lesson buried inside this story. Josef Bühler wasn't a monster in the cartoonish sense. He didn't scream orders or revel in cruelty on camera. He was something far more dangerous, a calm, capable, intelligent man who chose ambition over conscience, efficiency over humanity, and status over morality. He proves a truth that historians have repeated for decades. The Holocaust wasn't carried out only by fanatics. It was carried out by thousands of ordinary-seeming men who filled out forms, attended meetings, and said yes when they should have said no. That's what makes Bühler's story so important to understand, not because of the horror alone, but because of how normal he appeared while enabling it. His execution wasn't just justice for one man. It was a message to every future official hiding behind bureaucracy. Your signature has weight. Your silence has weight. Your compliance has consequences. Krakow didn't just execute a war criminal that day. It closed a chapter, one written in ink, meeting minutes, and the calculated request of a man who asked to be first. If this story hit you the way it hit us while researching it, that's exactly why we do what we do on this channel. Because history like this deserves to be remembered accurately, not forgotten in a footnote. If you learned something today, make sure you're subscribed, because next time, we're uncovering another name history tried to bury, someone whose actions were just as chilling, just as calculated, and just as real. Because the truth about this era isn't just history, it's a warning. And warnings only work if people remember them.